Hello again, YouTube viewers. This is CS and my promised response to Don Exodus's video Creationism, Dishonesty, and Immorality Part 2. So to get right into it, Don makes a long point about Dr. Behe being misquoted by creationists. Problem is, Behe is an ID advocate, and you'll find many pages in creationist websites like AIG and CMI praising ID as a step in the right direction, but strongly critiquing it as falling far short of the conclusions creationism believes correct. You won't find these sites basing their arguments on ID advocates, but you may find quotes in a context of, look, an ID advocate got it partially correct. If you take a look at Behe's most recent book, The Edge of Evolution, you'll see just before the title page that he places evolution and natural selection as only able to explain life up to the taxonomic level of somewhere between genre and order. Anything above that, he insists, must be explained by ID, and the rest of his book is his argument why. Interestingly, creationist attempts to identify the taxonomic equivalent of biblical created kinds place them between genre and order decades before Behe began promoting ID. Thus, natural selection and environmental adaptation through loss of genetic information are used in the creationist model to explain how animals went from what survived the flood to what we see today. Moving on to the more critical accusation of fear-mongering or exploiting fear, Don Exodus's research of creationist claims sinks to a new low when he says the underlying statements cannot be found in either source. True, there are only 2 web links you can check, but Don, the third source is visible in your screenshot. Did you even bother to seek out the primary source before accusing creationists of making this up? The third source cited by AIG, which you can't reference, is apparently an emailed copy of the killer's YouTube profile. I jumped over to CMI to see their coverage of the incident, and they quote half of what you underlined and read using completely different sources than AIG, one of which is a Google cache of the killer's YouTube profile. The killer's profile has been deactivated on YouTube, so you can't see it there, but it didn't take much searching to find screenshots of his posts. Viewers, take a look at the screens in this link. Between his October and November profile pages, all the words quoted by AIG are there, plus quite a bit more. Take a very good look at what he says in his October profile about life, religion, and philosophy. 4 quotes worth notice are, "Life is just a coincidence, result of long process of evolution and many several factors, causes, and effects. Religious people, your gods are nothing and exist only in your heads. Evolution is both a theory and a fact, creationism is neither one. There are no other universal laws than the laws of nature and the laws of physics." He also gives quite a bit more explanation of his thinking in his manifesto, which you can read here. Don then throws out the rather shallow statement that the killer obviously didn't understand natural selection because he didn't use the fitness criteria that Don would have used. Well, in a video pamphlet posted from his previous profile titled Natural Selector 89's Philosophy, he gives his selection criteria stating, "There should be only one master race on this planet. It would include humans that are intelligent, self-aware, capable of defending themselves against any threats, and living in harmony with the surrounding environment." So, Don, you're an academic and apparently doing well for yourself. How will any of your academic knowledge or success help you if a person like Evanin, who has discarded rules like don't bring a gun to school and don't murder people because he believes there are no other universal laws than the laws of nature and the laws of physics, comes to your workplace and starts shooting? If that ever happened, I certainly hope you or your coworkers have had some combat training so that you can survive such a radical change in selection criteria in your environment. The phrase about selection criteria for university tenure, publish or perish, would seem pretty unimportant at that point. Next, you move on to the Hitler-evolution connection. You insist that Hitler was more influenced by Christianity and toss us 2 quotes without citation to back your assertion. These quotes actually come from a speech delivered April 12, 1922 during his rise to power in what was then one of the most Christian nations in Europe. Funny, take a modern political leader like George W. Bush, and when he makes statements about having Christian belief, the response is not, certainly his decisions are influenced most by Christianity, but he's just saying that to get the votes in support of religious people. Here's another conundrum for you. Here are excerpts from your 2 quotes, along with the sentence that immediately follows your second quote. Note the anti-Semitism, which really played itself out later in the Holocaust. So Don, as an admitted Christian, would you say that Hitler's anti-Semitism is influenced most by Christianity, your religion, or is this, to use a favorite phrase of yours, a bastardization of Scripture? You also insist that Hitler only once mentioned evolution and then proceed to speculate on this one statement without ever providing viewers a citation or quote to double-check you. But let's take a look at some quotes from the Führer from much later in his climb to power, from things he said among his close friends and not in public. 10 October 1941, midday. Christianity is a rebellion against natural law, a protest against nature. Taken to its logical extreme, Christianity would mean the systematic cultivation of the human failure. 14 October 1941, midday. The best thing is to let Christianity die a natural death. When understanding of the universe has become widespread, Christian doctrine will be convicted of absurdity. We'll see to it that the churches cannot spread abroad teachings in conflict with the interests of the state. 21 October 1941, midday. The decisive falsification of Jesus' doctrine was the work of St. Paul. He gave himself to this work for the purposes of personal exploitation. By exterminating this pest, we shall do humanity a service of which our soldiers can have no idea. The page numbers refer to the book Hitler's Secret Conversations, 1941 to 1944, published in 1953. Don, you love to throw up the image of the God with us belt buckle, but a more balanced examination of Hitler's faith points out that these were worn by SS, supposedly forbidden to believe in God. Now consider the Austrian neurologist and psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. Aside from his earned degrees, he founded a successful school of psychotherapy, wrote 32 books which were translated into as many as 20 languages, and picked up 29 honorary doctorates. His area of interest throughout his career was the psychology of philosophical thinking. He was also imprisoned in 3 concentration camps. If anyone knows someone perhaps more qualified to speak on what thinking led the Nazis to do what they did, I'd love to hear that resume. Here's what he said. If we present man with a concept of man which is not true, we may well corrupt him. When we present him as an automation of reflexes, as a mind machine, as a bundle of instincts, as a pawn of drive and reactions, as mere product of heredity and environment, we feed the nihilism to which modern man is in any case prone. I became acquainted with the last stage of corruption in my second concentration camp, Auschwitz. The gas chambers of Auschwitz were the ultimate consequence of the theory that man is nothing but the product of heredity and environment, or, as the Nazis like to say, of blood and soil. I am absolutely convinced that the gas chambers of Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Majdanek were ultimately prepared not in some ministry or other in Berlin, but rather at the desks and in lecture halls of nihilistic scientists and philosophers. Now, Ben Stein's Expelled points out in its Holocaust segment no less than 3 times that the evolutionary thinking alone is not sufficient to end up at Nazism, but it is a major contributor. How interesting to note that Dr. Frankl lays the blame for the Holocaust not with evolution, but with nihilistic scientists and philosophers. He only blames evolution for leading man into nihilism. How frightening then to notice the parallel with today's National Academy of Sciences, where over 70% of its members insist there is no God, just one small step from the pre-World War II combination of nihilism and Darwinism. The only difference today is that these scientists, as far as I'm aware, still accept that there are universal moral laws which should not be violated, whereas scientists of Frankl's day recognized, as Nietzsche did, that there is no basis for absolute morals without a divine being, therefore anything goes and we make our own morals. I'll dive a bit deeper into philosophical consequences of evolution in my next video and why it's different from gravity. Don, you finish up with some blurry, unsighted charts trying to prove that evolution has decreased the violence in our country. Pity I can't double-check them. It's a bit reminiscent of the figures in the Monty Python sketch, Spectrum. Here are some stunning figures backing my point. Moving on without explanation. Regarding your claim, Don, I find it odd that people of the baby boomer generation remark at how the difference in their day, the biggest concern of teachers were students talking in class or chewing gum. Now we have metal detectors, campus police officers, and all too frequent school shootings. And their school days were before evolution began to be strongly taught as proven fact. You bring up a good point about how the philosophical consequences of evolution must be relevant to be worth mentioning in a discussion of the truth or falsity of evolution. There is an answer on that, but I'll have to address it in another video. In the meantime, I strongly recommend you bother to check sources before accusing opponents of dishonestly making things up, lest you become guilty of your own accusations as you did in this video and be proven a hypocrite. Viewers, in future productions I intend to move away from specifically responding to Don Exodus, unless I get requests to continue to do so, or more citations from his fans saying Don totally exposed creationists with such and such video. This is CS, signing off.